Okay, y'all. You are not going to believe the absolutely horrifying story I'm about to unpack for you. This isn't just how I found out the man I married was a complete monster. It's how I realized I had been unknowingly living at the epicenter of something truly evil, something that involved a horrifying human trafficking ring disguised as a noble cause. My entire reality, my marriage, my belief in the goodness of someone I loved, it was all built on a foundation of unimaginable lies. You've probably heard stories that make you ask, who TF did I marry? But this takes it to a level I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. This was marrying someone whose very life's work was based on the exploitation and destruction of others. I've debated sharing this for a long, long time. It's raw, it's painful, and honestly, it still feels surreal sometimes. But you need to hear it. This isn't just a story. This was my life, and it was built on a mountain of secrets, hidden right under my nose. And the truth, when it finally hit me, was soul-shattering. If you're ready for the whole unfiltered truth, and trust me, it's a lot, hit that like. Subscribe right now, and honestly, share this with anyone who needs to hear it. Maybe it'll help someone spot the signs I missed, or just understand the depth of human depravity that can hide behind a charming smile. Grab a drink, get comfy, because this is going to be a long, wild, and terrifying ride. All right, deep breath. Here's where it all began. It was about, almost 5 years ago now. I was living in Port Crest, California, working as a graphic designer for a small tech startup called Innovate Solutions. My life was pretty typical. Work, friends, trying to date in the age of apps. You know the drill. I was happy, stable, maybe a little bored with the dating scene, but generally content. I met Reese at this swanky charity gala downtown. It was one of those events where everyone looks beautiful, the champagne flows, and you feel like you're doing something good just by being there and maybe bidding on a silent auction item. I went with my friend, Sarah. We were making our rounds, admiring the ridiculously expensive dresses and trying to spot minor celebrities when I saw him across the room. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a smile that it lit up the room, you know? He was talking passionately to a group of people, gesturing with his hands, and they were absolutely captivated. Sarah nudged me. "Okay, who is that?" she whispered. I shrugged, trying to act cool while secretly trying to read his name tag from 50 feet away. No idea, but he seems intense. Later that night, he was speaking on stage. The event was for some international relief fund, but he was introduced as Reese Harding, founder of Hope Springs International. He spoke with such conviction about their work, providing clean water, education, and support for vulnerable women and children in developing countries. He talked about the dignity of people, the need for global empathy, the impact even small donations could make. He was articulate, charismatic, and genuinely seemed to care. He wasn't reading from notes. It felt like it was coming straight from his heart. I remember thinking, wow, this guy is actually doing good in the world. It was incredibly attractive. After his speech, he was surrounded, but somehow we ended up making eye contact. He smiled, that same warm, genuine smile. Later, as the crowd thinned out slightly, he came over. He didn't do the typical pickup artist thing. He just said, "Hey, I saw you listening intently during my talk." It means a lot when people genuinely engage with the message, not just the fancy food. We talked for what felt like hours that night. About his work, about my design job, about books, travel, everything. He was incredibly curious about me, asking thoughtful questions and actually listening to the answers. He wasn't boasting about Hope Springs International, not really. He talked about the people they helped, the challenges, the hopes. It felt authentic. He told me stories about communities they'd impacted, about children finally getting a chance at school, about women starting small businesses with their support. It painted such a vivid, beautiful picture of selfless work. He mentioned he traveled a lot for the charity, which explained why he wasn't a familiar face around Portcrest, but he had a small apartment downtown that he used as a base when he was stateside. He wasn't flashy. He drove a practical car, dressed well but not designer head to toe. It all felt very grounded, very real, despite the scale of his reported work. By the end of the night, I was completely smitten. He asked for my number, not in a cheesy way, but like he genuinely wanted to continue the conversation. He texted the next day, and we went on our first date a few days later. It was perfect, effortless. He was just as charming, intelligent, and kind one-on-one as he was on stage. Over the next few months, we fell hard and fast. When he was in Portcrest, we were inseparable. When he traveled, he called and texted constantly, sending pictures of places he was in, always looking slightly blurry or generic in hindsight, but I didn't notice then. And talking about his work with the charity. He described visiting remote villages, meeting with local partners, seeing the impact of the donations firsthand. It felt like I was dating someone who was truly making a difference in the world, and it made me incredibly proud to be with him. He made me feel seen, heard, and deeply cared for. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: passionate, kind, successful, and devoted to a cause bigger than himself. He started talking about Hope Springs International more openly, inviting me to smaller local events, fundraising dinners, volunteer recruitment drives. He'd introduce me proudly as his girlfriend. Everyone involved with the charity seemed to adore him. They talked about his vision, his dedication, his tireless efforts. He had built this incredible reputation, this aura of being a saintly figure, a true humanitarian. He started gently suggesting ways I could get involved. "You're a designer," he'd say. "Hope Springs is always needing help with brochures, our website, social media graphics. Your skills could really make a difference, you know? Reach so many more people." It sounded amazing. Combining my professional skills with a cause I was starting to believe in, spearheaded by the man I was falling in love with, it felt like a natural next step, a way to support him and contribute to something meaningful. I eagerly said yes. I had no idea that saying yes to helping Hope Springs International would be the first step into a nightmare I could never have imagined. I thought I was offering my design services to a noble cause. I was actually opening the door to a world built on exploitation and unimaginable cruelty. A world where the man I loved was not a savior, but something far, far worse. Getting involved with Hope Springs International felt less like volunteering and more like being welcomed into a family, albeit a very busy, slightly secretive one. Reese was thrilled. He immediately brought me into the inner circle, not the official board members I saw on the website, who were mostly prominent businessmen and philanthropists around Portcrest, people I'd later learn he barely interacted with, but the core group of people who worked directly with him on the day-to-day operations. There was Lena, who managed logistics, always stressed and on her phone. David, who handled donor relations, smooth-talking and always at fundraising events. And a few others who seemed to drift in and out, involved in various aspects like program development or field support. They all seemed incredibly loyal. To Reese, almost reverent. They talked about his dedication, his sacrifices, how he was practically running the whole thing himself because he cared so much. My role started small. Designing flyers for events, updating the website with his carefully curated success stories, and photos, again, slightly generic, often showing the backs of people's heads or distant group shots. Creating social media graphics. It felt good, like I was using my skills for something truly impactful. Reese would praise my work constantly, telling me how much it helped them reach more donors, how beautifully I captured the spirit of Hope Springs. It felt like a partnership, a shared mission. As I got more involved, I started seeing things that, Looking back were bright, flashing red flags. But at the time, I dismissed them, rationalized them, or just didn't understand their significance. For instance, transparency was not their strong suit. I asked about financial reports, wanting to see how donations were being used so I could highlight the impact in my designs. Reese always had an excuse. Oh, our financials are complex, involving multiple countries, currency, conversions. It's all audited, of course, but the full reports are highly technical. Trust me, every dollar goes where it's needed. He'd show me simplified summaries, beautiful infographics I designed myself based on his numbers, showing funds allocated to shelter programs, education, medical aid. It looked legitimate, but there was never the detailed breakdown you'd expect from a large international nonprofit. If I pushed, he'd get slightly, not angry, but disappointed. "I thought you trusted me," he'd say, with that sad look in his eyes. This work is hard enough without questioning every little thing, and I'd feel guilty for even asking. Red flag number 1, lack of transparency met with emotional manipulation. Then there were the field visits. Reese was constantly traveling. He'd be gone for weeks at a time, to places like Thailand, Cambodia, parts of Eastern Europe. He'd send photos, but they were always either of landscapes, or him with a few people who looked slightly uncomfortable, or generic shots of buildings labeled as our school or our clinic. He rarely showed specific faces of the people being helped. When I asked why, he'd say, "For their privacy and safety. We work with vulnerable populations. Exposing their faces online can put them at risk." Which, okay, made sense on the surface, but it meant I never saw concrete proof of the individual lives being changed, just the abstract idea of it. Red flag number 2, lack of verifiable proof of specific project impact, explained away by plausible-sounding reasons. His communication during these trips was also spotty. Sometimes he'd be unreachable for days, citing remote locations or lack of signal. Other times he'd be online at strange hours, sending brief, slightly frantic messages before disappearing again. He always had a reason: intense negotiations, unexpected crises, security concerns. It fit the narrative of someone doing dangerous, important work. But it also created distance and made it impossible to get a clear picture of what he was actually doing. Red flag number 3, inconsistent and often secretive communication during field work. The office itself was another strange point. Hope Springs had a small, rented office space in a quiet part of downtown Port Crest. It was sparsely furnished, felt more like a temporary staging ground than the headquarters of a global charity. There were always boxes of supplies arriving and being shipped out: clothes, medical kits, school supplies. But the logistics were chaotic. Sometimes things would sit there for days, or be shipped to addresses that seemed odd, like private residences or commercial warehouses rather than official aid distribution points. When I asked about it, Lena would just sigh and say, "Oh, different countries have different customs and regulations. It's complicated getting things where they need to go." Red flag number 4. Office operations felt disorganized and slightly amateur for a large international charity. Reese also started becoming more controlling about my time. If I wanted to go out with Sarah or other friends on a weekend, he'd often suggest we work on Hope Springs stuff instead. "We have that grant proposal due," or "Could you just quickly design this flyer? It's urgent for the event." It was subtle at first, framed as us being a team, working towards a common goal. But it slowly escalated, making me feel guilty for wanting personal time away from him and the charity. He'd say things like, "This work is demanding. It takes dedication. Not everyone understands the sacrifices we have to make." This pressure wasn't just about the charity. It started creeping into other areas of my life, isolating me slightly from my usual support system. Red flag number 5, increasing control over my time disguised as shared dedication to the cause. One time I offered to help pack some of the boxes. I saw things that were not typical aid items. There were expensive electronics, designer clothes tags still on some items, sealed envelopes with large amounts of cash mentioned in labels, petty cash, field office Y. When I asked about it, David quickly stepped in, laughing it off. "Oh, those are just donations from some of our wealthier patrons. We sell the luxury goods to raise extra funds, and some field operations just need immediate cash access." It sounded plausible, but it felt off, like laundering money or goods. But I was new. I didn't want to seem suspicious or untrusting. I just nodded, feeling a knot in my stomach I couldn't explain. Red flag number 6. Suspicious items and cash being handled with little explanation. Despite these little moments of unease, the overall picture Reese presented was so compelling. He was still the kind, charming, passionate man I fell in love with. He talked about our future, about maybe one day living part-time in one of the countries where Hope Springs worked, truly immersing ourselves in the mission. He made me feel like I was part of something bigger than myself, something profoundly good. And I desperately wanted to believe it. I wanted him to be the man he seemed to be, the humanitarian hero. We got engaged after about a year of dating. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. He proposed on a beach at sunset, talking about building a life together, dedicated to each other and to making the world a better place. I said yes without a second thought. I was marrying my hero, but the little knots in my stomach were starting to twist tighter. The red flags, though rationalized away, were piling up, and I had no idea just how deep the deception went, or what kind of darkness was truly hiding beneath the surface of Hope Springs International. My engagement felt like the culmination of a beautiful love story, but it was really just tightening. The chains of a horrifying lie that was about to unravel in the most terrifying way imaginable. I was walking blind into a nightmare, armed only with my love for a man who wasn't who he seemed, involved in a charity that was anything but. After we got engaged, my involvement with Hope Springs International only deepened, and so did the unsettling feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Reese was insistent that we work on the charity together even more, seeing it as a way to build our future. He pushed me to take on more responsibility, not just design, but helping manage communication with certain partners overseas. This is where things started getting seriously weird. The partners I was supposed to liaise with weren't typical aid, organizations or local community leaders. They were often individuals communicating via encrypted apps, using coded language that made no sense to me. When I asked Reese what the acronyms or phrases meant, he'd give vague explanations like, "It's just shorthand for different program phases," or "security protocols for sensitive regions." It felt like I was being given pieces of a puzzle without the picture on the box. Red flag number 7. Coded communication with ambiguous partners. I remember one specific instance. I was asked to draft an email confirming the arrival of goods for Project Nightingale in Southeast Asia. The partner's reply was short and specific. "Package confirmed. Delivery expected 3 tomorrow. Need secure transport from port to nest." I forwarded it to Reese and asked what Project Nightingale was and what nest meant. He just laughed it off. "Oh, Project Nightingale is a small initiative helping women fleeing difficult situations. The nest is just a safe house we use temporarily." It sounded okay, but something about the cold, transactional language felt off. It didn't sound like humanitarian work. It sounded like logistics for something illicit. Red flag number 8. Highly suspicious non-humanitarian language used for charity operations. Reese's control escalated too. He became increasingly possessive of my time and who I talked to. If Sarah called while we were together, he'd make a face or sigh dramatically. "Is that Sarah? Still got time for gossip when we have so much to do for Hope Springs?" He subtly undermined my friendships, making me feel like my friends didn't understand our important work. Sarah, bless her, was starting to get worried. She'd make comments like, "He seems a bit intense about this charity stuff," Or, do you ever just hang out and not talk about Hope Springs? I'd brush her off, defending Reese and our shared mission, but her questions planted seeds of doubt. Red flag number 9. Reese actively trying to isolate me from friends and family. He also started handling my finances more closely. Since we were engaged and planning a future, he suggested merging accounts or letting him manage investments. He framed it as practical, him being better with money because of his international experience. It felt reasonable in the context of getting married, but it gave him visibility and control over my funds in a way that retrospectively feels chilling. Red flag number 10. Pushing for control over my personal finances. One weekend, a massive shipment arrived at the small Hope Springs office. Not boxes of clothes, but crates. Heavy, unmarked crates. Lena and David seemed stressed, arguing in hushed tones. Reese arrived, immediately took charge, barking orders. He wouldn't let me get close, saying it was sensitive medical equipment that needed careful handling. The crates were loaded onto an unmarked white van later that night, driven by someone I'd never seen before, someone with a blank, unsmiling face. The whole operation felt clandestine, not like a typical aid shipment. Red flag number 11. Mysterious, heavy, unmarked shipments handled secretly at night. I couldn't shake the feeling after that. The coded messages, the strange shipments, the lack of transparency, the control. It wasn't just disorganized charity work. It felt like something was being hidden, something significant and potentially dangerous. My gut was screaming at me, a constant low hum of anxiety. I started subtly pushing back. I asked Reese more direct questions about specific projects, about the funding sources beyond donor events, about the people I was communicating with. He'd get defensive, irritable. Why are you suddenly so suspicious? Don't you trust me? Don't you believe in what we're doing? The charming facade would crack, just for a second, revealing a flash of something cold and calculating underneath. It was terrifying. I remember one night, after he'd snapped at me for asking about a strange wire transfer I saw on his laptop screen. He'd left it open by accident. I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every weird interaction, every missed detail. The pieces didn't fit the picture of a noble charity. They fit a picture of something else, something darker. I thought about Sarah's concerns. I thought about the knot in my stomach that was now a full-blown panic. I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to find out what Hope Springs International was really doing, and who Reese Harding really was. My entire future, everything I believed in, hinged on finding the truth. And I had a terrifying feeling that the truth was going to shatter my world. I didn't know how I was going to do it, or where to even start looking. But I knew I had to start digging. I had to see what horrors were lurking beneath the glossy surface of the man I was about to marry and the charity we were building our life around. The thought alone made me sick to my stomach, but the alternative, living in this state of suffocating unease and willful blindness, was no longer an option. I had to know, even if it destroyed me. Okay, so section before ended with me realizing I had to dig, that the knot in my stomach wasn't just nerves about marrying a busy humanitarian, but a siren going off. The small inconsistencies, the controlling behavior, the weird shipments, they weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern I couldn't ignore anymore. The glamorous facade of Hope Springs International and the charming persona of Reese Harding were starting to feel like a very thin veil over something, deeply disturbing. The decision to investigate was terrifying, though. I was engaged. I was living with him part-time, spending most of my free hours immersed in his world, our world. He had subtly, and not so subtly, isolated me. My closest friends were starting to feel distant, because I was always busy with charity, work, or just exhausted from the emotional gymnastics of trying to reconcile the man I loved with the red flags popping up everywhere. Asking questions directly had only resulted in defensiveness and emotional pressure. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one hint that I was questioning things, and I honestly didn't know what he was capable of, and that newfound uncertainty was chilling. My investigation had to be secret. Sneaky. I started small. When Reese was in the shower or on one of his frequent urgent calls, I'd glance at his laptop screen if it was open. I wasn't technically savvy enough to hack passwords or anything, but I looked for file names, browser history, anything that seemed out of place. Most of what I saw seemed legitimate on the surface. Spreadsheets, emails about fundraising, travel itineraries. But sometimes, I'd see file names that were just strings of numbers and letters, or browser tabs that closed instantly when he noticed I was nearby. He became more guarded with his devices around me, which, of course, only fueled my suspicion. Red flag number 12. Becoming overly protective of devices and digital activity. I started paying closer attention at the office, too. The Hope Springs office was small, like I said, just a few rooms. My design work gave me access to their shared drive. I spent late nights supposedly finishing up brochure layouts, but really, I was trawling through folders. Most of it was the usual nonprofit stuff, donor lists, event plans, generic project proposals, but hidden within folders with mundane names like administrative or archived reports, I started finding things that made less sense. There were spreadsheets detailing asset movements that didn't align with typical aid supplies. The values were sometimes astronomical, involving commodities I didn't understand, listed with offshore bank accounts I'd never heard of, in countries where Hope Springs didn't claim to operate. There were invoices from shell companies registered in tax havens for services that were vaguely described as consulting or logistics support. It looked less like charity accounting and more like money laundering. Red flag number 13. Financial records pointing to shell companies, offshore accounts, and vague transactions. I also found communication logs, not the public-facing ones, but internal chats and emails between Reese, Lena, David, and those other core team members. They often used those same coded phrases I'd encountered when liaising with partners. Phrases like package secured, delivery window confirmed, cargo manifested, payload en route. It wasn't about distributing water filters or school books. It sounded like smuggling. They talked about manifests and clearing customs for items that were clearly not listed as aid shipments. Red flag number 14. Internal communications using coded language related to illicit logistics. One of the most disturbing things I found was a series of emails discussing recruitment pipelines and candidate profiles. Initially, I thought it was for hiring staff or finding local volunteers. But the language was clinical, dehumanizing. They weren't talking about skills or experience. They were talking about suitability, pliability, market value. The profiles included details that seemed irrelevant to aid work. Physical descriptions, family situations, vulnerabilities. It felt sickeningly cold. I didn't understand what they were recruiting for, but it wasn't charity workers. Red flag number 15. Dehumanizing language used in recruitment discussions. During this time, Reese was oblivious, or perhaps just confident he was above suspicion. He was still the doting fiancé when he was home, planning our wedding, talking about our future. The contrast between that loving man and the cold, calculating figure I saw glimpsed in stolen moments or coded messages was jarring. It made me question my own sanity. Was I overthinking? Was I twisting innocent details into something sinister because I was feeling insecure or stressed? He was so good at making me feel like I was the one being difficult or untrusting when I raised questions. He continued to control my access to information and people. If I asked about a specific donor, he'd brush it off. If I wanted to attend a certain meeting, I wasn't senior enough, or it was too technical. He tightened his grip, making me more reliant on his version of events. It felt like I was in a gilded cage, given just enough information to feel involved, but not enough to understand the full picture. The field trips became even more suspect. He'd come back looking exhausted, sometimes bruised, with vague stories about difficult negotiations or unexpected dangers. But then I'd find flight itineraries showing he'd only been in a major city, or hotel receipts from luxury resorts that didn't exactly scream remote village aid work. He always had an explanation, of course: needing a safe base, meeting with high-level officials, recovery time. But the discrepancies were adding up, screaming inconsistencies. Red flag number 16. Tangible evidence, receipts, itineraries, contradicting his field trip stories. The stress was immense. I was living a double life: the happy, engaged woman supporting her humanitarian fiancé by day, and the terrified investigator sifting through digital crumbs and emotional manipulation by night. I wasn't sleeping. I was constantly on edge. I lost weight. My friends noticed. Sarah tried to talk to me several times, expressing concern, but I was afraid to tell her anything concrete. What if she didn't believe me? What if telling her put her in danger? I felt utterly alone. One night, while Reese was on a call in the other room, I managed to access a hidden folder I'd seen mentioned in one of the internal chats. It required guessing a simple, infuriatingly personal password, something related to his fabricated backstory. Inside, the file names were even more cryptic: dates followed by single letters, location codes. I opened one dated recently, connected to one of the offshore accounts I'd noted. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a scanned document. It looked like a manifest, but the cargo wasn't goods. It listed names, dates of birth, countries of origin and destination. Accompanying this was a scanned, blurry photograph of a group of people, mostly young women and children, looking vulnerable and scared. The destination code on the manifest matched one of the partner locations I'd communicated with using coded language. My blood ran cold. This wasn't Project Nightingale helping women flee difficult situations. This was moving people, like cargo. The word recruitment from the other emails flashed in my mind, followed by market value, suitability, pliability. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely close the laptop. I knew, with a sickening certainty that plunged me into despair, that Hope Springs International wasn't a charity. It was a front. And the people listed on that manifest, those weren't beneficiaries. They were victims. I closed everything down, trying to appear calm, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had just scratched the surface, but the glimpse I got was horrifying. The man I was engaged to, the man who talked about saving the world, was orchestrating this. The red flags weren't just warnings of financial mismanagement or controlling behavior. They were signals that I was living with a monster, and that the noble cause I'd dedicated myself to was a cover for something unspeakably evil: human trafficking. I sat there, the room spinning, the weight of this realization crushing me. I was engaged to a man who bought and sold human beings, and I was, unknowingly, a part of his operation. How could I have been so blind? How could I have fallen for this? The shock was paralyzing, quickly followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. I wasn't just an unknowing bystander anymore. I was connected, and I had to figure out what to do next, because my life, and potentially the lives of others, depended on it. After seeing that manifest, after the word trafficking slammed into my brain and reality shattered, a switch flipped. The terror was immense, a constant icy grip on my chest, but it was quickly joined by a fierce, protective rage. How dare he use the language of hope and charity to hide such depravity? How dare he lie to me, manipulate me, and involve me, however unknowingly, in something so monstrous? The man I loved was gone, replaced by a terrifying stranger who wore his face. My focus shifted entirely. It wasn't about understanding the red flags anymore. It was about gathering undeniable proof and figuring out how to get out safely and expose him. This wasn't just about me. It was about those faces on the manifest, the candidates in those emails. I was living inside the lion's den, and I had to tread with absolute precision. My investigation became bolder, driven by adrenaline and a desperate need for the truth. I knew I couldn't just rely on glimpses of his laptop anymore. I needed solid evidence. I started taking calculated risks. While he slept, I'd meticulously photograph documents on his desk or screenshots of cryptic messages on his phone when I could get past his security. I looked for anything connecting him directly to the manifests, the money transfers to offshore accounts, the coded communications about shipments. It was terrifying, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I'd practice holding my breath, my hands shaking, trying to get a clear shot in the dim light of the apartment. Red flag number 17, my internal list. The constant, paralyzing fear that defined my life now. I realized my access to the HSI shared drive was my most valuable asset. I started systematically going through every folder, no matter how innocuous. The name. I found more manifests, more coded chats, more financial records that detailed payments to individuals and entities I couldn't identify, but which were clearly not aid recipients or legitimate suppliers. I started saving everything, copying files onto a secure, encrypted USB drive I kept hidden, first taped under my dresser, then later, after seeing a crime show, sewn into the lining of a rarely used coat. I also started recording conversations. Not openly, of course. I used the voice memo app on my phone, discreetly placed when we were talking about HSI business, or when Lena or David were around. Their casual comments, the way they discussed movements, or clients, or product, in chillingly detached terms, added layers to the picture. They weren't just complicit. They were actively involved, using the charity jargon as a shield. It was sickening to listen back to later, hearing their mundane voices discuss such horrific things. Red flag number 18. Casual, detached language. About illegal activities disguised as charity talk. Trying to verify the addresses and entities mentioned in the documents was incredibly difficult without raising suspicion. I'd use public computers at libraries or coffee shops, always clearing the history, always looking over my shoulder. I searched for the names of the partners, the offshore companies, the destination addresses. Some led to post office boxes, others to vacant lots, others to businesses that had no public connection to aid work, shipping companies, import-export businesses, even anonymous shell corporations registered in places like Panama or the British Virgin Islands. It was like following a digital breadcrumb trail that led only to dead ends designed to hide the truth. I also started discreetly reaching out to Sarah. I couldn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her I was worried about Reese, that things weren't adding up with the charity, that I felt increasingly isolated and scared. She was immediately supportive, offering to meet up, just listen, anything. Her unwavering friendship was a lifeline in this suffocating darkness. I asked her to do some innocuous-sounding online searches for me, checking out the legitimacy of certain organizations Reese mentioned, looking for news articles about HSI that weren't on their website. There were surprisingly few negative ones, a testament to his careful public image. She didn't know the depth of what I was looking for, but her willingness to help, no questions asked, meant the world. Red flag number 19. Reese's successful isolation tactics were thankfully not foolproof due to true friends. The physical office became a target too. Reese traveled frequently for longer periods now, 2 or 3 weeks at a time. During one of these trips, I told him I needed to go into the office to pick up some design files. I went late at night. The main office was locked, but I knew where they kept a spare key hidden for emergencies. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice. Once inside, the place felt different at night. Silent, empty, but somehow radiating the secrets it held. I focused on Lena and David's desks, knowing they handled a lot of the day-to-day logistics. I found more physical manifests, tucked away, in filing cabinets labeled donor correspondence. I found burner phones hidden in desk drawers. I found notebooks with cryptic notes, schedules and calculations that looked like profit margins, not aid budgets. I even found a small worn ledger book that detailed specific transactions, dates, amounts, and chillingly shorthand descriptions like 3F1C Europe, 2MSE Asia, transfer to handler Z. The numbers corresponded uncannily with names on the manifests I'd found digitally. This was the hard copy proof, the stuff that couldn't be easily deleted. Red flag number 20. Physical ledgers detailing human beings as quantifiable transactions. I photographed everything, my camera flash muffled by my coat. I worked quickly, my heart pounding, jumping at every creak of the old building. I remember finding a small, locked metal box in the back of David's filing cabinet. I didn't have a key and couldn't force it open without making noise. The frustration was agonizing. What was in there? More proof? Names? Money? As I was gathering my things, ready to leave, I heard a car pull up outside. Panic seized me. I dove under a desk, holding my breath. I heard footsteps, the key turning in the lock. It was Lena and David. They weren't expecting anyone to be there. They were talking quietly, urgently. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard snippets. Customs contact is solid. Package arrives early. Reese said to meet the driver at the usual drop point. They were clearly finalizing logistics for an upcoming shipment. I lay there, frozen, listening to the casual, almost bored tones they used to discuss moving human beings like freight. It solidified everything. This wasn't just Reese. It was a network. They left after about 15 minutes, their car driving away. I stayed under the desk for another 10, my body rigid with fear. When I finally emerged, I was trembling, soaked in a cold sweat. But I also felt a surge of grim determination. I had found more than enough to confirm my worst fears. Pieces of the puzzle were fitting together, revealing a picture so dark and horrifying it felt unreal. But it was real. And I was trapped inside it. I knew I had to get out. Not just leave Reese, but disappear from Hope Springs International entirely. And I had to find a way to get this information, this undeniable proof, to the right people. People who could stop this. I was no longer just investigating. I was planning an escape. And I knew that the moment Reese realized I knew, my life would be in grave danger. The next steps had to be flawless, silent, and swift. Seeing Lena and David at the office that night, hearing them talk so casually about packages and drop points, it wasn't just confirmation. It was a punch to the gut. It showed the chilling normalcy of their operation, how deeply entrenched they were in this depravity, and it hammered home the terrifying reality that I wasn't just dealing with Reese. I was dealing with a network of people who were complicit in human trafficking. The proof I had gathered, the digital manifests, the coded communications, the physical ledger with its horrifying shorthand descriptions, the photos of vulnerable people, was damning. There was no rationalizing this away anymore. No telling myself I was paranoid or mistaken. This was real. Hope Springs International, the beacon of hope I had fallen for, the cause I had dedicated my time and skills to, the foundation of the future Reese and I were building. It was a front. A sophisticated, cold-blooded front for buying and selling human beings. The sheer horror of this realization was overwhelming. The man I was engaged to, the man I had shared my life and my dreams with, was a monster. Every kind word, every loving gesture, every passionate speech about helping others. It was all a performance, a lie designed to build a facade, to attract unsuspecting people like me, donors, volunteers, even potential victims, into his orbit. I felt violated in the deepest possible way. Not just lied to, but fundamentally betrayed. My belief in goodness shattered. The emotional fallout was immediate and devastating, but I had to push it down. There was no time for grief or anger. I was living with the man who orchestrated this. I was still pretending to be the loving fiancé, the dedicated HSI volunteer. The danger was immense. If Reese had gone to these lengths to build this empire of exploitation, what would he do to protect it? What would he do to someone who knew his secret? The fear was a living thing, crawling under my skin. Every glance Reese gave me, every question he asked about my day, felt loaded. Was he testing me? Did he suspect anything? I became hypervigilant, watching his every move, analyzing his words. I had to maintain the illusion of normalcy. Perfect. The art of deception myself, which felt sickeningly ironic given his own mastery of it. I continued my routine, working on HSI designs, attending fundraising calls, discussing wedding plans. But internally, I was in a constant state of panic, my mind racing, trying to figure out an escape plan. I couldn't just pack a bag and leave. Reese had too much control, too many connections. And I had this evidence. It wasn't enough to just save myself. I had to find a way to expose him, to potentially save the people he was exploiting. I knew I needed help. Real help. Not just Sarah, who could listen and do discreet online searches, but professional help. Law enforcement. But how do you go to the police and say, "Hi, I'm engaged to a seemingly reputable humanitarian, but I think his international charity is a front for human trafficking, and I've been living with him and working for the organization." Would they even believe me? I had photographic evidence and copied files, but would it be enough to trigger an investigation without putting myself directly in the line of fire? The thought of going to the police was terrifying. What if they messed up? What if they tipped him off? What if they were somehow compromised? The scale of his operation, the international nature of it, the powerful connections he seemed to have built through the charity. It all felt overwhelming. I started researching law enforcement agencies that handled human trafficking, looking for resources online, always using those public computers, always careful. I learned about federal agencies, international task forces. It seemed incredibly complex and daunting. Meanwhile, living with Reese was unbearable. Every touch felt repulsive. Every time he smiled or said he loved me, I felt a wave of nausea. I saw him differently now. When he talked about vulnerable populations, I heard the cold calculation of a trafficker eyeing his prey. When he talked about logistics, I saw the crates, the manifests, the dehumanizing language. He wasn't a humanitarian. He was a predator hiding in plain sight. I had nightmares. Vivid, horrifying dreams about the people on the manifests, about being trapped, about Reese's charm turning into something monstrously cruel. I started sleeping as far away from him as possible, making excuses about being stressed or needing space for wedding planning. He seemed disappointed, but didn't push too hard, absorbed in his own shadowy work. The pressure was building. I knew I couldn't keep up the act forever. My fear of being discovered was constant. I started noticing little things that made me think he might be watching me. My laptop being slightly out of place, his phone screen on when I entered the room, then quickly turned off. Questions that felt too specific about what I'd been doing or who I'd been talking to. It could have been paranoia, but after everything I'd uncovered, I couldn't afford to dismiss it. Red flag number 21. Growing signs of surveillance. Or suspicion from Reese. I needed a plan. A concrete plan to get out, secure the evidence, and get it into the right hands. It had to be meticulously planned, because failure wasn't an option. Failure meant potentially disappearing, becoming another statistic in the grim world he operated in. I started researching escape routes, places I could go, how to contact law enforcement discreetly, how to protect the digital evidence I had gathered. It felt surreal, like I was planning a spy mission, but this was my life, my real, terrifying life. The engagement ring on my finger felt like a shackle, a symbol of the elaborate lie I had fallen for. I remember one evening, Reese was on one of his late-night calls, speaking in hushed tones in his office. I crept closer, listening intently. I heard him mention names, specific figures that matched the ledger I'd found. He was talking about an upcoming movement, logistical details, payment confirmations. It was chillingly clear and concrete. This wasn't hypothetical. This was happening. Now that night, I didn't sleep at all. The sounds of the apartment, usually comforting, now felt menacing. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant siren, sent jolts of fear through me. I held the hidden USB drive in my hand, feeling its small weight. This held his undoing. But getting it out, getting me out, felt like an insurmountable challenge. I was alone, scared, and living with a man I now knew was capable of anything. The horrifying discovery was made. Now came the terrifying task of surviving it. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life would never be the same. After that night, after hearing Reese on the phone confirming the cold reality of an upcoming movement, the abstract horror became terrifyingly concrete. This wasn't just something that happened somewhere else. It was happening now, orchestrated by the man sleeping in the next room. The fear ratcheted up to an almost unbearable level, but it solidified my resolve. I wasn't just leaving a bad relationship. I was escaping a criminal enterprise, and I had evidence that could dismantle it. My focus shifted from uncovering the truth to planning my extraction. Every interaction with Reese became a performance. I smiled. I talked about wedding venues. I nodded along when he discussed HSI's impact. Inside, my stomach was a twisted mess of knots, and every nerve ending felt raw. I practiced keeping my face neutral, my voice steady, even when he talked about returning from a trip where I knew he'd been arranging another horrifying shipment. It was exhausting, soul-crushing work, but necessary for survival. The first thing I needed was a safe place to go. I couldn't go to my own apartment. He knew where it was, had keys, and it would be the first place he'd look. My parents lived too far away, and I was terrified of putting them in danger. Sarah was my rock. I took a huge risk and called her from a burner phone I bought with cash from a small anonymous convenience store outside of town. I didn't give her all the details over the phone, couldn't risk it, but I told her enough to convey the urgency, and the danger. "Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Something is terribly wrong. Reese isn't who he seems. The charity, it's not what we thought. I've seen things, horrifying things. I need to leave. Now. Like right now, as soon as I can. Do you have a place I could stay for a few days? Somewhere safe he doesn't know about?" There was a pause, then her voice, calm but firm. "Oh my God. Okay. Yes. My cousin, Emily, she's out of town for a month. I have the key to her place. It's downtown. Super secure building, he'd never know. It's small, but it's yours for as long as you need. Are you safe right now? Should I call someone?" No, I'm okay for now." I lied, my heart pounding. I'm still here. I'm planning. I need to get some things. And evidence. I'll text you from this number when I know when I can get out. Don't call me on my regular phone. Don't call Reese. Don't tell anyone. Please." Okay, I understand," she said, her voice laced with fear, but also determination. "Be careful. So careful. The key is under the mat at my place, just in case. But I'll leave it with the concierge with Emily's name on it. That's safer. Just ask for Emily Jones's key. Call me the second you're out." That call was another lifeline. Knowing I had a safe destination, thanks to Sarah, was a massive weight off my shoulders. Red flag number 22. The overwhelming relief of having a single trusted ally outside the situation. Next, the evidence. I had the digital files on the encrypted USB drive. That was relatively easy to conceal, sewn into my coat lining, but the physical ledger, the one detailing the transactions in chilling shorthand, it was in a locked box in David's filing cabinet at the office. I knew I had to get it. It felt too important, too real, to leave behind. It was proof in a way the digital files weren't. I started making excuses to go into the office alone again. Reese was traveling for a few days, giving me a window. I told Lena and David I needed uninterrupted time to finish a rush design project for an upcoming event. They seemed annoyed, but agreed. This time, I went prepared. I bought a small set of lock picks online. Felt ridiculously cloak and dagger, but desperate times. I practiced on a cheap padlock at home. Getting into the office was easier the second time, less panic. The building was quiet. I went straight to David's filing cabinet. My hands were shaking again as I tried to pick the lock on the metal box. It took what felt like an eternity, fumbling with the tiny tools in the dark office, every click echoing like a gunshot. Sweat was dripping down my face. Finally, with a small, soft snick, it opened. Inside, alongside some cash and a few more burner phones, was the ledger. It was small, leather-bound, unassuming. Holding it felt surreal. This book, containing the cold, clinical details of human lives treated as commodities. I photographed every single page meticulously with my phone, then tucked the book itself deep into my backpack, buried under layers of clothes I'd brought as a prop for my late-night work session. Red flag number 23. Risking everything to retrieve physical evidence of the atrocities. I also grabbed a few more hard drives I found labeled archived data from a back closet. I had no idea what was on them, but my gut screamed to take everything I could. Digital crumbs could build a trail. Leaving the office that night, my backpack heavy with stolen secrets, felt like crossing a threshold. There was no going back. I had undeniable proof, and I was now a direct threat to Reese and his network. The actual escape plan solidified around Reese's next scheduled field trip. He was going to be gone for nearly 3 weeks to Southeast Asia. Perfect window. I would wait until he was gone, give it 24 hours to ensure he was truly out of the country and his immediate team wasn't monitoring the apartment, and then I'd leave. The packing was agonizing. How do you pack for potentially leaving your entire life behind without raising suspicion? I started subtly, slowly. A few items of clothing here and there, tucked into a duffel bag hidden in the back of my closet. Important documents, my passport, birth certificate, social security card. I gathered them one by one, making copies first and storing the originals with the USB drive. Jewelry, sentimental items. Everything had to be weighed against the risk of him noticing something was missing. I focused on essentials, things I couldn't replace, and the evidence. Everything else was secondary. Living with him during those final days was pure psychological torture. He was affectionate, talked about our future, the places we'd go together. He even bought me a small gift before he left for his trip, a necklace. The irony was nauseating. I felt like I was going to crack, scream at him, expose him right there, but I held it in. I had to. The day he left for his trip was one of the hardest. I drove him to the airport, played the role of the loving fiancé saying goodbye. Watching him walk away, carrying a briefcase that probably held more secrets and misery than I could imagine, felt both like a victory and a terrifying leap into the unknown. We hugged. He kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me and would call as soon as he landed. I smiled, said, "I love you too. Be safe." Every word was a lie. Every touch felt like poison. As I drove away from the airport, I didn't go straight back to the apartment. I drove aimlessly for hours, the duffel bag containing my life and his undoing in the trunk. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and crushing fear. He was gone. The window was open. I spent that night at my own apartment, which felt alien and slightly dangerous after being so immersed in his world. I barely slept, jumped at every sound. The next morning, I went back to his apartment. It felt eerie, his presence still lingering in the air, but empty. I did one final sweep, looking for any other stray documents or devices. Found another hidden phone, wiped it clean, and took it anyway. Every piece felt important. Then, I took the physical ledger from my backpack and put it, along with the USB drive and copied documents, into a small, secure box I'd bought. This box was small enough to be easily carried, but sturdy. This was the heart of the evidence. With the box secured, my hidden duffel bag packed with essentials, and the burner phone charged, I took one last look around the apartment that had been the gilded cage for my nightmare. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene. I locked the door behind me, the click echoing in the sudden silence, and walked away. I didn't look back. Getting to Sarah's cousin's apartment felt like navigating a minefield, even though it was just a cab ride across town. Every car felt like it was following me. Every passerby felt like they were watching. The paranoia was intense, but rational. I was carrying secrets that powerful, dangerous people wanted to keep buried. Arriving at the secure building, getting the key from the concierge, who thankfully just followed protocol and didn't ask questions, and stepping inside Emily's quiet, anonymous apartment. It was the first moment I'd felt remotely safe in weeks. The door locked behind me. The city sounds muffled. The silence of a neutral space washing over me. I leaned against the door, sliding down to the floor, and finally let myself break. The sobs came in waves, wrenching and uncontrollable, releasing the pent-up terror, grief, betrayal, and sheer exhaustion. I sat there for a long time, just crying, the small box of evidence clutched in my lap. I had escaped the physical location, but I was still trapped by the truth I carried. The next, even harder step was using it. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a fragile spark of hope. I was out. I had the proof. Now I had to survive. The fallout and make sure Reese Harding and Hope Springs International were exposed for the horrifying reality they were. The first few days at Emily's apartment were a blur of pure survival instinct and emotional collapse. I barely ate, slept fitfully, jolting awake at every sound. Sarah came over immediately, bringing food, blankets, and just her presence. I finally, haltingly, started telling her everything. Showing her the photos of the manifests on my phone, explaining the coded language, the strange shipments, the ledger. Watching her face as I spoke was difficult. The initial concern morphed into shock, then disbelief, then absolute horror. She listened patiently, asking questions, trying to make sense of the nightmare I was recounting. "Human trafficking?" she kept saying, her voice hushed, her eyes wide. "Reese? The charity? I don't understand. He seemed so good, so dedicated." That was the hardest part, articulating how someone could appear so benevolent while orchestrating such evil, how the charm and the good deeds were just camouflage, how the red flags, individually dismissible, formed a horrifying pattern when viewed through the lens of the truth. I felt a desperate need for her to believe me, not just for validation, but because I needed her support for what came next. She did believe me, thank God. She held me while I cried, helped me sort through the scattered pieces of evidence, offering practical support in the face of unimaginable horror. "Okay," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Okay, we need to figure out what to do. Who do we call? How do we do this safely?" We spent hours researching, looking up federal agencies, trafficking hotlines, nonprofit organizations dedicated to helping victims and exposing rings. The complexity was overwhelming. We knew we couldn't just call 911. This was too big, too international, too dangerous. We needed to find the right entry point. Someone who would take this seriously and had the resources to handle it. The hardest part was the waiting. Waiting for Reese to realize I was gone. Waiting for the inevitable fallout. I had disabled the tracking on my phone, left the burner phone off unless I needed to contact Sarah. But I knew he was smart, resourceful, and likely paranoid. His first attempts to reach me were texts to my regular phone. Casual at first. "Hey, landed safely. Long flight. Missing you already." Then, as the hours passed and I didn't reply, the tone shifted. "Haven't heard from you? Everything okay?" Then, annoyance. "Why aren't you answering? Is something wrong?" Then, thinly veiled anger and suspicion. "Where are you? I'm getting worried. Call me now." Finally, a barrage of calls and texts demanding to know my location, accusing me of abandoning him, threats disguised as concern. "You need to call me. Some things have come up with HSI. I need to talk to you urgently. This isn't just about us. People could be in danger." It was classic abuser manipulation, using guilt and fear. But hearing people could be in danger from him after everything I knew was sickeningly ironic. I didn't reply. Sarah helped me block his number, though the notifications of his attempts to reach me still filtered through, a constant digital reminder of the danger I was in. Red flag number 24, Reese's immediate escalation to demanding, threatening communication when his control was broken. Then, the calls started coming from Lena and David, feigning concern, asking if I was okay, if I was with Reese. They were clearly trying to locate me for him. I blocked their numbers too. I knew I had to get this evidence to the authorities before he had a chance to destroy anything or disappear completely. But every step felt fraught with peril. How do you approach the FBI or Homeland Security with a box of documents and a story about your fiancé being a trafficking kingpin? Sarah helped me organize the evidence. We printed out key emails and manifests, put the physical ledger and the USB drive in a secure bag. It felt overwhelming, trying to make sense of the interconnected web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and coded messages. I decided to try reaching out to a national human trafficking hotline first. It felt less intimidating than walking into an FBI office. I called from Emily's apartment, late at night. Explaining the situation to the person on the other end was incredibly difficult. I was rambling, crying, trying to convey the scale of the deception and the danger I was in. The person was calm, professional, but I could hear the shift in their tone as I provided details about HSI, Reese Harding, and the nature of the evidence I had. They took down my information, the key details, and promised to forward it to the appropriate federal agencies immediately. They also provided resources for victim support and witness protection, which suddenly felt terrifyingly real. Red flag number 25. The chilling reality of needing witness protection. After that call, the waiting became even more intense. Every siren outside, every knock on the door. Thankfully, it was just Sarah with more supplies, sent me into a cold sweat. I felt exposed, even in the secure apartment. A day or two later, I was contacted. Not by the FBI directly, but by a local detective who had been assigned to make initial contact based on the hotline referral. Detective Miller, he was cautious on the phone, asking basic questions, verifying my identity without revealing much about his own agency. He asked to meet. Meeting him felt like another risk, but a necessary one. We agreed to meet in a neutral, public place, a busy coffee shop across town. I was terrified he wouldn't believe me, that my story would sound too wild, too unbelievable. Sarah came with me, sitting a few tables away, a silent but vital support. Detective Miller was ordinary looking. Mid-50s, kind eyes, tired demeanor, not the sharp, intense agents from TV. We sat at a back table. I had the box of evidence with me, hidden in a large shopping bag. I started from the beginning, recounting how I met Reese, getting involved with HSI, the gradual uncovering of the lies, the red flags I'd missed, the horrifying discovery. I showed him the photos of the manifests on my phone, opened the box and showed him the ledger, the USB drive. He listened intently, his expression shifting from polite attention to focused seriousness. He asked pointed questions, demonstrating a clear understanding of the complexities of trafficking cases. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't tell me I was crazy or overreacting. He looked at the ledger, his eyes narrowing, tracing the chilling shorthand. He examined the manifests. After I finished, there was a long silence. He looked at me, his expression somber. "Ms. my last name," he said, using my last name for the first time, making it feel official, real. This is serious, very serious. The details you've provided, the evidence. This aligns with intelligence we have about international networks. This is not a small operation you've uncovered. The weight of his words hit me. Intelligence we have. He believed me. The relief was so profound, so overwhelming, I felt lightheaded. But it was quickly replaced by the magnitude of what he was saying. This is not a small operation. Reese Harding, he said, looking through some notes he'd taken. Founder of Hope Springs International, known in philanthropic circles, travels frequently. He looked up at me. You were engaged to him? I nodded, tears welling up again. Yes, I was going to marry him. I thought he was saving the world. He was, Miller said quietly, but not in the way you thought. He carefully packed the evidence back into the box. This is crucial. We need to take this. This needs to go to the federal level immediately. You are likely in significant danger. You did the right thing by leaving and contacting us. You need to stay somewhere secure. Tell no one about this meeting. Not a soul. We will be in touch. This is just the beginning. Walking out of that coffee shop, leaving the evidence with Detective, Miller felt like stepping onto a precipice. The secret was out. The wheels were in motion. I had survived the escape, but now I had entered a new, even more perilous phase, cooperating with the authorities to bring down a powerful, dangerous network built on human misery. The trauma of living through it was immense, but facing the aftermath and the fight for justice felt like the only path forward. My life was irrevocably broken, but maybe, just maybe, I could help prevent others from being broken too. Handing over the evidence to Detective Miller was a turning point. It felt like finally placing the unbearable weight I'd been carrying onto someone else's shoulders, but it also signaled the beginning of a different kind of ordeal. Navigating the complex, often frustrating process of cooperating with law enforcement while trying to process the trauma I'd endured. Almost immediately after meeting Miller, things escalated. He passed the case up, and I was contacted by federal agents, specifically from a joint task force that included the FBI and Homeland Security, specializing in human trafficking. They were incredibly professional, but their focus was solely on the operational details of Reese and HSI, not on my emotional state, which, I understood, was necessary, but also felt incredibly cold after the emotional roller coaster I'd been on. They debriefed me for hours, multiple times, going over every detail I had uncovered, every red flag I'd noticed, every conversation I'd overheard or participated in that now had a chilling new meaning. They asked about the structure of HSI, the roles of Lena and David and the others, Reese's travel patterns, the partners I'd communicated with, the financial transactions. They wanted everything, meticulously documented and verified. Red flag number 26. The sheer scale of the operational details the agents needed, underscoring the size of the network. Showing them the photos of the manifests, explaining the ledger entries, playing the recordings from the office. It was like reliving the nightmare over and over. Each piece of evidence, while validating my sanity and the truth of my story, brought back the visceral horror of the discovery. They were careful, but their questions were probing, clinical. When did you first see this? What was your reaction? Who else was present? Can you identify the voices on this recording? They were particularly interested in the coded language and the logistics of the shipments. They explained how this fit common patterns they saw in trafficking operations. Using legitimate businesses or charities as fronts. Moving people like illicit cargo. Using coded communication to evade detection. Hearing them connect the dots based on my evidence was both terrifying and empowering. It confirmed that this wasn't just Reese's twisted personal project. It was part of a larger, horrifying industry. The agents also made it clear that I was considered a key witness, and my safety was a priority. They arranged for me to stay in a secure location, different from Sarah's cousin's apartment, one that was monitored. Living there felt strange and isolating. I couldn't go anywhere without informing them, couldn't contact anyone outside of Sarah, who was now also part of the periphery of the investigation, having provided assistance. My old life was completely gone. My job, my apartment, my friends, except Sarah. The future I thought I had, all vaporized. Red flag number 27. The instant erasure of my normal life due to the danger I was in. Reese, meanwhile, was trying everything to locate me. The agents were monitoring his communications. They shared some of it with me, carefully curated. Texts, emails, voicemails. His tone fluctuated wildly. Furious, pleading, threatening, manipulative. He was clearly panicking, his carefully constructed world crumbling. He was telling people I had stolen money from HSI, that I was unstable, that I had disappeared, and he was worried about my mental health. A classic smear campaign to discredit me before I could expose him. It was infuriating to hear his lies continue, even now. Lena, David, and others from the core HSI team were also being monitored. Some of them went quiet, disappearing. Others continued their activities, seemingly unaware or unconcerned that their operation was under scrutiny. It highlighted the depth of the network and the challenge the agents faced. The agents explained that building a case like this took time. They needed to corroborate my evidence, trace the financial trails, identify other members of the network, locate potential victims. They worked methodically, quietly, trying not to spook the key players before they were ready to move. My role became one of waiting, answering questions when they had them, and trying to piece my own life back together. In the confines of the secure location, I started therapy, trying to process the profound betrayal and trauma. Talking about it helped, slowly, incrementally. The therapist helped me understand the dynamics of manipulation and control I'd been subjected to, how someone like Reese could so effectively deceive. It wasn't my fault I was targeted. It was a testament to his skill as a predator and my own capacity for trust and hope, which he weaponized. Red flag number 28. Recognizing the psychological patterns of abuse and manipulation after the fact. The news broke eventually, not about Reese directly at first, but about an international operation disrupting a trafficking ring with ties to a fraudulent charity. It was vague, but I knew. And then, specific individuals were named. Lena and David were among the first arrested. Seeing their faces on the news, knowing they were finally facing consequences for their monstrous actions, brought a sense of grim satisfaction, but also sadness for the lives they had ruined. Reese, however, remained elusive initially. He had disappeared from Southeast Asia shortly after I fled. The agent suspected he had multiple escape routes and identities. The manhunt was on. Living with the knowledge that he was out there, knowing that I was the one who had triggered the investigation, was a constant source of anxiety. I knew he was dangerous, capable of anything. Cooperating with the authorities wasn't glamorous or easy. It was a grueling process of recounting trauma, navigating bureaucracy, and living in constant fear. But every piece of information I provided, every document I had risked my life to retrieve, felt like a blow against the darkness. It was a way to fight back, not just for myself, but for the victims, for the people on those manifests. Months passed. The investigation widened, spanning multiple countries. More arrests were made, impacting different nodes of the network. The scope of HSI's depravity was even larger than I had initially grasped. They weren't just moving people. They were involved in multiple forms of exploitation, all hidden under the guise of humanitarian aid. It was sickening. Finally, the call came. Reese Harding had been apprehended overseas in a complex operation involving international cooperation. Hearing that he was in custody, that his reign of terror was over, was a moment of profound relief, a release of tension I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding on to for so long. He would face justice, both for the trafficking and for the elaborate fraud he had perpetrated. My cooperation with the authorities was winding down. The case was moving towards prosecution. My role would likely shift to being a witness in court. The secure location was no longer necessary. The immediate threat from Reese was gone, though the agents cautioned that remnants of his network might still pose a risk. I was free to start rebuilding, but from scratch. My life was a blank slate, marked by the indelible trauma of what I had lived through. The future I'd planned with Reese was a cruel illusion, but the experience had forged in me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had faced the monster, survived, and helped bring him down. The healing process was just beginning, but I knew that I couldn't, and wouldn't, stay silent about what I had seen and lived through. My story, however painful, needed to be told. And so, here we are, at the quiet edge of it all. The telling is done. The raw threads have been laid bare, and the storm has long since passed, leaving behind a different kind of stillness. It's strange, isn't it? How something that consumed your entire world, that twisted everything you thought you knew into a horrifying nightmare, can eventually settle into a memory. A heavy one, yes, and one that still carries echoes in the quiet corners of the heart, but a memory nonetheless. Discovering the truth. The real truth behind the polished facade, the smiling faces, the promises. It was like the world tilted on its axis, casting everything into a harsh, unwelcome light. That clarity, that painful, shattering understanding, reshaped me in ways I'm still trying to articulate. It teaches you about the depths of human capacity, for both light and shadow, and it certainly teaches you to look beyond the surface, to trust that persistent whisper of intuition when something feels off. The lessons are etched deep. Be vigilant, yes, but also remember that even in the darkest stories, there are glimmers of resilience, of the quiet strength that emerges when you have no choice but to survive. This journey, this impossible path I walked, has led me here, sharing it with you, hoping it might offer something, a perspective, a gentle nudge towards cautious optimism, or perhaps simply the quiet satisfaction of reaching the end of a long road. And now, as the day fades and the world outside begins to settle, it feels right to let the story soften too. To let the intensity recede, like waves pulling back from the shore. You've listened to something heavy tonight, and I appreciate you staying with me, through the disbelief, the fear, the eventual hard-won peace. It's okay to let it go now, to let your thoughts drift, to let the quiet of this moment wrap around. Thank you for listening all the way through. I wish you tranquil thoughts and the sweetest of dreams.